sessions of the ESG training for lawyers. We most sincerely apologize for rescheduling the third session. So, okay, sorry for that. As I was saying, we sincerely apologize for rescheduling the third session. So the third session was supposed to hold on the 15th of, I am sharing on YouTube, but I don't want the interference. Let me. Sorry, I'm getting interference on another, so I've just exited that. Apologies. Okay, so the first session was supposed to hold on the 15th of July. That session had earlier on been scheduled before a colleague and a close friend of mine passed. And that day was her service of song. So I couldn't get myself to be holding that webinar that day while the service of songs was going on. So I was present at the service of songs. So as a result of that, we had to reschedule. In fact, because we wanted to still hold it last week, we now rescheduled to Friday. But as we are tidying up the preparations, our facilitator had an emergency that couldn't allow her to facilitate the session on Friday. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule again. So today, we instead of just missing out on the third session, we are going to be having a combined session, just like we advertised. The third and fourth topics have been merged and will be touched on during this session. So once again, you are welcome to our ESG training for lawyers. So today, just to remind us, and I know we have earlier on talked about the topic. So today's topic is ESG insights, shaping legal practice and emerging opportunities for Nigerian lawyers. So today we are looking at exploring how ESG is transforming legal practice, the evolving Nigerian ESG landscape, emerging career opportunities for lawyers, and the role of lawyers in areas such as sustainable finance, corporate governance, compliance, climate litigation, transactions, dispute resolution, and ESG advisory. So we are looking at how do we become relevant and also provide legal services in this emerging area. So that's why this session is particularly important, that we pay attention and also participate actively. So now I would just also bring on board our facilitator, Choma Ibo, Joanne Ibo. You're welcome, Choma.
Thank you, Fama. Thanks
Yes,
for having me again.
Thank you. You're welcome. And thank you. And like I said earlier, Choma is facilitating this training all the way from Canada. It's the early hours of the day in her area. And we are doing this training, the 4-part training at no cost to lawyers. So we're particularly grateful to her for collaborating with us in this training. So Choma, yeah, most welcome. So I'll go ahead in trying to introduce her. So I'll just share the screen where her profile is. So Choma Joanne Ebo is a sustainability and climate advisory professional with 8 years of experience working at the intersection of ESG strategy, climate advisory, and legal practice. Before transitioning into sustainability advisory, Joanne practiced law in Lagos, Nigeria. She was called to the Nigerian bar in 2018 and brings a unique perspective that combines legal training with practical experience, advising companies on emerging ESG and climate related issues. She currently works as chair in Canada, where she advises companies on decarbonization strategy, climate governance, sustainability disclosure, and transition planning. She work draws an internationally recognized standards and framework, including the GHG Protocol, ISSB Sustainability Disclosure Standards, and the Standard Science-Based Targets Initiative. And her experience also spans sectors including aviation, energy, infrastructure, transportation, and customer consumer staples. She had advised organizations and supported them in developing GHG reduction targets and strengthening climate governance structures and advancing sustainability reporting aligned with leading global framework. So Chama, you're most welcome and we are happy to have you at this joint session where we'll be talking about particularly the role of lawyers and how the opportunities in this space for lawyers. So I'll hand over to Choma now to go ahead with the training.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ifoma, for recapping the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon in Nigeria. Like Ifoma said, it's really early here, so I have my coffee on deck. Also, apologies also once again for the reschedules, and I'm really hoping that today's session is practical and career focused. And so, unlike previous sessions today, we'll be moving from understanding what ESG is, which I hope we already have like a higher level understanding on the topic now, to really thinking about where lawyers actually come into play in the industry. And so before we get right into the meat of today's session, it's been a few weeks, so I thought it would also be good to have a very brief recap on what was discussed in our last session. So if we recall, we really focused on firstly understanding the global ESG landscape as we know it today. We went through a number of reporting frameworks, guidance across different markets. We went through all the acronyms because there are quite a lot. We also focused on, of course, the Paris Agreement, which really underpins every regulation that we have existing today, which is essentially a call for us to, as a collective, to work towards actively reducing emissions and really achieving a net zero by 2050, temperature rising. And so we also, pivoted to speaking about Nigeria's current ESG regulatory landscape, what the reporting frameworks are currently. We touched on key topics like transition policies, what the carbon market is, climate-related financial risks. So having said that, the aim for today's session, please next slide, is going to really focus on, as Ifama mentioned, the first topic being sustainable finance, ESG disclosures, and legal liability. Next slide, please. Yeah, so today we're going to be focusing on really understanding how ESG is reshaping legal practice. We'll also be looking at identifying emerging ESG-related legal risks. We will then move to understanding sustainable finance transactions from a lawyer's perspective. I'll then walk through some of the emerging career opportunities that are springing up for lawyers across the ESG ecosystem. And then we'll, close with some practical next steps on how to really position yourselves as lawyers to leverage on the legal advantage you have and also contribute to this quickly evolving industry. Next slide, please. Okay, so awesome. So to really kick things off, I thought it would be important to really discuss where and how ESG is already reshaping the legal profession. I narrowed it down to like six main trends and things that we're already seeing currently. So essentially, the topic here is that ESG is no longer just a sustainability issue. It is now influencing investment decisions. It's influencing legal practice as we know it, regulations, corporate governance, financing the energy transition. And so every one of these points I've just mentioned actually creates new demand for legal expertise. And so the first trend where we're seeing today is sustainable finance transactions. The cost for the energy transition is extremely expensive. And so sustainable finance plays a major role in that to ensure that there is the development and scaling up of green transactions, sustainability investment. And so I've noted down there that to date, there's been $5 trillion dollars so far that have been issued in sustainable debt globally. And so this just means that there's been so much investment, so much capital being poured into sustainability projects like renewable energy projects, solar projects, CCUS projects. And so capital is being mobilized currently for a sustainable future. And then we're going to get into where lawyers play a role in this in the next few slides. The second trend is ESG disclosures and legal liability. And so for the most part of the previous sessions we've had, we've really honed into the existing regulatory landscape and what that means for disclosure requirements. It means that more increasingly, companies, issuers have more stringent reporting obligations. And so more disclosure obligations actually translates to greater legal risks because there are now guardrails around ensuring that companies are disclosing climate commitments that can actually be met. In previous sessions, we talked about greenwashing and what that is. So this presents an opportunity as well for lawyers in the industry to really tap into their advisory expertise through being able to translate complex regulations. What does this mean for a specific sector? How can they meet XYZ reporting obligations to ensure that they do not get exposed to legal risk, reputational risk, etc. And then thirdly, another theme where lawyers are increasingly playing a role in is through corporate governance. And again, like we touched on this in a few sessions, and the G pillar in ESG, and it's really a crucial pillar because from the top, it's really important for companies to have strong and good corporate governance practices. And so essentially, this has matured to expectations for boards to have the expertise and oversight to ensure that they're overseeing ESG risks and opportunities enterprise-wide. And then the fourth theme as well, we're seeing as well is just like emerging ESG practice areas that are quickly evolving. And so we'll also get into that in the next slides to come. And then I'll touch on some career opportunities that are currently expanding, and then give my insights on what I think a lawyer should be really doing now to position, um, you know, all ourselves collectively in ensuring that we're able to not only contribute, but also capitalize on the momentum being built in the industry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We touched this. Awesome. So starting with the one of the most important roles I would say lawyers are already currently playing is with sustainable finance. And essentially sustainable finance refers to financing that integrates environmental, social, and governance considerations into investment and lending decisions. And so there are a couple of transactions that these fall under. The first being green bonds. And so the purpose of a green bond, for instance, is really to finance eligible green projects. And example of such projects could include renewable energy, green buildings, clean transportation, energy efficiency. And so, think of a company like Seplat Energy as the issuer. So they would be issuing a bond and essentially requesting financing from investors to help them develop or really invest in a renewable energy project. And so in such a transaction, a lawyer's role here could either be through advising the company itself, so advising Seplat Energy in the transaction, or advising the investors that are going to be financing the transaction. So this could look like structuring the transaction. This could look like drafting and negotiating legal documentation, could also involve advising on, evolving disclosure obligations, and also importantly, post-issuance reporting obligations to ensure that the company that has issued the bond is actually investing all the capital into financing that green project. So this is one area that lawyers are already playing and exercising their responsibilities through drafting, through advising, through ensuring compliance with the reporting obligations. A second transaction that falls under sustainable finance transactions is sustainability-linked loans. This is a bit different from green bonds in the sense that these loans and agreements provide financing for general corporate purposes, but the nuance is that it links the loan pricing to the borrower's achievement of specific sustainability targets. So, for instance, the company, perhaps the company has requested a loan to finance a solar project, or to actually reduce their emissions, this loan would either increase, so the interest in the loan would either increase or decrease, depending on whether the company is able to achieve those targets. So you'll see that the difference between the green bonds and sustainability-linked loans is that sustainability-linked loans are actually more specific to the company in question. And so a lawyer's role here would include structuring the transaction, would include drafting and negotiating the loan agreement. It would include reviewing sustainability claims that are being made to lenders and made to the public. So this is one area that lawyers are already playing a role in, as you know, we all work towards financing the energy transition. The third transaction that's increasingly important as well is sustainability-linked bonds. And the purpose of this instrument is to raise capital for, again, general corporate purposes. This time, the bond's financial terms are linked to the company achieving predefined sustainability targets. So it's obviously very similar to loans. The only difference here is that the loans interest rate actually increases or reduces based on the company actually achieving their targets. So a lawyer's role in the SLB would also include negotiating the sustainability commitments that are being made, would be drafting and negotiating legal documentation. It could be advising on ongoing reporting obligations and also advising on how to manage legal and reputational risks. And just like I mentioned earlier as well, a lawyer could be advising the company that is issuing the bond. So basically the company that is requesting to borrow money, or advise the investor that is raising the capital. So there's like multiple actors in play here, and lawyers are increasingly exercising their responsibilities and expertise through some of these transactions that are pivotal in investment and financing that are going to ensure that renewable related projects are actually actualized. Next slide, please. Yes, so another theme as well that I touched on the earlier slide is around just the quickly evolving nature of disclosure requirements and what that means from a company's perspective in terms of exposure to legal liability, exposure to fines, exposure to claims and lawsuits being brought by different actors. So the first point here is around greenwashing, and I'm hoping this rings a bell because we did touch on it in the previous sessions, but greenwashing is making exaggerated or environmental claims that are false, that are not substantiated, or are exaggerated, misleading, etc. So a company is saying like they're committed to net zero by 2050 without having a transition plan disclosed, without having a comprehensive decarbonization strategy that really lays out how they will be meeting those targets, could be classified as greenwashing. And so, you know, as was also referenced in previous sessions, we touched on how some jurisdictions already now regulate on this through their consumer protection laws, which expose companies to lawsuits. So a lawyer's role here could be to, number one, review sustainability related claims. It could be to verify disclosures. Lawyers also show up here through advising marketing teams, for instance, ensuring that framings are made in a very explicit way that doesn't expose the company to legal risk and lawsuits. Lawyers could also represent companies through responding to regulatory inquiries or litigation related to alleged greenwashing. Another area that also brings lawyers in is directors' duties. And we're also going to touch on this in the next slides when we touch on corporate governance. But yeah, so the board, as we know, plays a major role in ensuring that there is appropriate oversight over ESG-related risks and disclosures in companies. So a lawyer plays a role and supports this through advising boards on their fiduciary duties, their governance responsibilities, and also oversight on ESG-related risk and disclosures, essentially helping ensure that board decisions and disclosures comply with evolving legal and regulatory expectations. Lawyer's role, like through, being a corporate secretary, could also include ensuring that ESG remains at the top of the agenda during board committee meetings. It could ensure that boards are also staying up to date and getting competent on specific ESG related subject matters. So the third point as well here is around security disclosures. And as we know by now, many jurisdictions are moving from voluntary to a mandatory landscape. So, that's coming in through existing regulations, through frameworks for reporting, standards that we touched on, such as ISSB, um, International Sustainability Board, sorry. There's also IFRS S1 and S2, which essentially complements ISSB. And so many markets are already implementing their own reporting regimes. We touched on the CSRD from the EU in last session, for instance. So all of this means that lawyers are playing an increasing role in advising public listed companies that are now subject to all of these evolving disclosure requirements. We touch on the fact that Nigeria is also slowly transitioning towards a mandatory sustainability reporting landscape through the phased adoption of ISSB. And so all of these things and moving pieces mean that lawyers are going to be strategically positioned to give like their expert analysis on what this means for specific sectors, what this means for companies that are exposed to all of these potential legal risk, reputational risk, transition risks. So yeah, so this is like an example of how lawyers are already playing a role and would increasingly be playing a role in the ESG reporting landscape. Next slide, please. Okay, so another theme as well where lawyers show up is corporate governance. And I know by now we already have like a strong level understanding on the importance of this. Corporate governance is just how companies are directed and controlled. And we've touched on how the governance pillar really underpins the environmental and social pillar. And so a good corporate governance framework determines fairness, it determines transparency, it determines accountability, determines oversight, risk management, independence. And so lawyers play a role in this through coming in to advise the board and management on specific governance-related matters, duties, liabilities, So this is increasingly relevant, as well as, the governance pillar is such a crucial piece for there to be like a higher level and actually tangible implementation of ESG across the board in the enterprise. And so lawyers are playing a very important role through advising the boards and management on ensuring that they're showing up how they should be, and showing demonstration on having excellent oversight on ESG related issues in the enterprise. There's also compliance. So lawyers coming through ensuring that the board is being compliant and really driving ethical business conduct and practices in specific companies. There's also the piece on risk management. I'm hoping that so far we're understanding that ESG is really important, because what it's saying is that ESG risk, just like how financial risk are integrated into a company's enterprise risk management process, ESG should be held to the same rigor. And so lawyers are coming in through ensuring that ESG is identified and managed as part of a company's risk framework and risk register. There's also the piece on, just consistently promoting transparency and accountability across the board, across the board committees, in the committee charters, just ensuring that that transparency piece and accountability piece is really being disclosed on, and providing like decision useful information for stakeholders through like relevant annual reports, through sustainability reports, just making sure that language is being framed in a way that meets governance related requirements. There's also the piece on obviously protecting stakeholder and long-term value. We touched on, in previous session, we touched on shareholder primacy, and then the stakeholder perspective. And this piece here is really lawyers coming in to be a safeguard on the interest of shareholders and stakeholders at large, really supporting that long-term value piece, which is really what ESG and sustainability is. And so all of this matters because this is going to build trust with investors, with regulators, with stakeholders. Good corporate governance would strengthen risk management and business resilience. It also, of course, promotes ethical leadership in all of these companies, keeps the board accountable to ESG-related issues. And like I just mentioned earlier, it supports long-term value creation. So I also wanted to touch on a really interesting piece as well under CAMA 2020, which says that directors can now face personal liability for failure to manage material risks, including ESG-related risks. So again, yeah, so a lawyer's role here is just really integral in advising the board, ensuring that ESG is on the top of the agenda, that ESG risk and opportunities are being integrated into the company's risk management framework. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where we sort of segue now into how ESG is reshaping traditional areas of legal practice. And before I get into it as well, I also want to caveat by saying that, so I don't see ESG as creating an entirely new area of law. What I'm saying rather is it is changing existing practice areas. And if even if you think about developed and matured markets like Canada or the States, in established law firms, you necessarily you wouldn't necessarily find an ESG standalone practice group. But what you'll find that in already established practice areas, ESG is already being embedded into those existing areas. So I'm seeing them in practice areas like corporate and commercial, banking and finance, energy and infrastructure, dispute resolution, governance, risk and compliance. And what I did was actually did a scope on, some of Nigeria's established law firms that we all know, like Templars, Olaniwa, Ajayi, Bawo, and Igadalo, Udo, Doma. And I'm seeing the theme and trend being that for these existing practice areas, there's specific ESG related work that is emerging. And so for corporate and commercial, there's now like ESG due diligence, supplier contracts, corporate governance, responsible sourcing as specific areas of concentration for these practice areas. For banking and finance, I'm seeing green bonds being increasingly important, sustainability-linked finance transactions being increasingly important, ESG governance, project finance. For energy and infrastructure, seeing like a lot of projects around renewable energy, CCUS, power purchase agreements, carbon markets, renewable energy and power projects, just really changing what the existing practice area was a few years back. And obviously, we know that the energy market in Nigeria is just most integral, and the area that's going to really be the focus in the years to come, given that the energy transition is now like moving towards renewable natural gas, for instance. I foresee a lot more renewable energy contracts coming into play. There's also dispute resolution, like climate litigation, environmental disputes, greenwashing claims that could be rising up in the next few years. And currently, under governance, risk, and compliance, there's increased scrutiny for like board oversight and being able to really advise on what a good corporate governance practice should be, ESG reporting, anti-bribery, ESG regulatory compliance. So all of this to say that there's already opportunities that are in the works, and think of, yeah, when you think of ESG, you don't necessarily think that it has to be like a standalone practice area, because you probably wouldn't find that because it's still quite nascent. Like I said, even in developed markets, but just being able to pick out what those themes are, and even thinking of where you're currently at in your different areas of law, you probably find that you've been contributing and really exercising some responsibilities related to ESG without even thinking about it. So yes, these are just, this is where lawyers already are, and ESG is simply changing the advice that clients need currently. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just an addition to the previous slide, also seeing an emerging ESG focus to be on employment and human rights through work around labor rights, DEI, workplace safety, human rights due diligence, of course, technology and data as well, through like ethical AI governance, guardrails, responsible AI, AI, good AI governance practices is increasingly an area of focus under the technology and data service groups. So yeah, so the transition, the ESG transition is really creating opportunities in existing areas of practice. And it's like something to think about as you continue to like evolve in your current practice areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so I also thought it was important to touch on examples as well that show how ESG is creating opportunities beyond traditional legal practice. I'm sure not everyone here is practicing. So it's also showing up in in-house counsel positions, and example of such industries could be oil and gas, transportation, manufacturing, telecommunications, consumer goods, mining. And so what I'm saying is that ESG and legal responsibilities are also being embedded within sustainability, within compliance rules, within corporate governance roles, strategy functions, and the typical work includes reviewing ESG disclosures. It could be advising on ESG strategies. It could include supporting sustainability reporting, developing governance policies and frameworks, regulatory analysis, reviewing specific supplier contracts across different sectors, and also advising the board. So, um, like I also added the caveat earlier, um, I think when it comes to like specific ESG roles and responsibilities, again, what's happening is that ESG is also being restructured. So you're unlikely to find, or you're more unlikely to find rather like ESG specific roles. ESG is now being embedded into pre-existing functions. So that's why you see for a compliance role, there will be elements on ESG responsibilities, on ESG expertise. So just thinking about that from a wider vantage point, I think helps just to ensure that you don't box yourself into just thinking that if it's not ESG or if it doesn't have anything related to ESG and sustainability, then it has nothing related to the industry, because that's not how it is in practice. So I wanted to also add that point. The second area where lawyers are also showing up in is through financial institutions and consulting firms. So ESG and legal responsibilities are being meshed and embedded within compliance, enterprise risk management functions, corporate governance, sustainability and policy advisory, corporate engagement, which is a large part of my work, which is actually where I come in, because I work for an ESG consulting firm, and having a law background is an added advantage. So the typical work includes like climate-related financial risk, scoping, sustainable finance transactions, like we touched on in previous slides, ESG regulatory compliance, ESG due diligence, regulatory analysis, because just to touch on ESG due diligence as well, this is another quickly evolving area, because now ESG is being considered before making investments and lending decisions. So before like a merger and acquisition, now the company that is buying is now interested in understanding and screening the other company to understand how they're scoring on specific E, S, and G metrics. And so this is where a lawyer can come in through our ability to more easily analyze regulations, to interpret complex reporting requirements, complex policies, advice. So yeah, this is how like things are evolving and shaping up rapidly in this space. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the third area as well is, of course, government and regulators, which is just the bedrock of ESG, as I'm sure we all have consensus on now. In the past session, we talked about the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, SEC, CBN, NCCCC, and NESRIA. All of these play a major role in holding the pen, in drafting regulations, in drafting reporting requirements, and ESG and legal responsibilities are also being embedded within policy development, within regulatory oversight, within environmental regulations, regulations to reduce specific carbon emissions, like methane emissions. And so all of these things, again, call for lawyers to really play a role in like shaping what the next fair of regulations are going to be as Nigeria evolves in its reporting landscape. There's also, of course, international organizations which are also presenting opportunities, like the World Bank, IFC, African Development Bank, UNDP, UNEP. You'll increasingly see many opportunities that touch on ESG and legal rules being embedded within descriptions like climate finance, sustainable development, policy and governance positions. So yeah, if you think of opportunities outside of traditional legal practice, there's already existing opportunities that are already available right now, and so you can think about how to position yourselves through really bridging knowledge gaps when it comes to ESG and trainings like this and frameworks, understanding what frameworks mean, being able to synthesize that into actionable recommendations for businesses. So these are just like areas I think we should have like a pulse check on to see how the direction of travel is. Next slide, please. So this slide as well touches on like some statistics, and I also wanted to like walk through some of the numbers because I don't want us to look at these numbers in isolation because these mean something specific for lawyers. And so the first is around climate-related cases and just climate litigation. So I found that to date, 3,099 climate-related cases have been filed globally across 55 jurisdictions. And so what does this mean? This means like that you come in because with more litigation, with more climate-specific litigation being filed, this presents an opportunity for lawyers to either represent the companies that are being filed against or actors that are bringing these lawsuits. It also involves being able to have expertise on translating regulations, translating reporting requirements, advising issuers and companies, but they're not just reactively, but also being proactive with it to ensure that companies are already positioning themselves in a way that shields them from potential legal risk, potential reputational risks that could come out of having a climate litigation, right? So these numbers are, of course, astronomical, and lawyers are in these numbers, right? So there's also the data point that shows that 2,700 plus climate-related laws and policies have been adopted worldwide, expanding the legal and regulatory landscape for businesses throughout the time in these sessions. We've really touched on the reporting landscape. We've touched on IFRS, ISSB, GRI, CSRD. All of these things mean that companies are increasingly being subject to reporting obligations, reporting requirements. And this is where lawyers come into play again through being able to interpret what specific regulations mean to specific sectors being able to interpret policies, being able to ensure that they're advising their clients and companies on how to manage transitional risk, how to manage legal risk, how to manage reputational risks. So lawyers really play a role, like a crucial role in now and also in the years to come. Thousands of companies are already preparing sustainability disclosures under frameworks such as IFRS, S1 and S2, CSRD, and other reporting requirements. And so this means that the legal profession is evolving and lawyers are going to be the ones at the forefront, advising their clients, advising their companies, advising public issuers on how to prepare for these sustainability-related disclosures. And then, of course, we've touched on who the drivers are for ESG. It's a growing market, growing industry. The drivers are regulators, the drivers are investors, the drivers are stakeholders, and also societal expectations that are really driving businesses to ensure that they integrate ESG considerations across their strategy, across their risk and enterprise frameworks through setting clear and comprehensive metrics and targets. So yeah, ESG is really definitely causing a shift in the legal profession, and I see lots of opportunities coming up, really rapidly also with Nigeria's well, not Nigeria's announcement, but the Financial Reporting Council announcing the phased adoption of IFRS, for instance. This is going to mean just so many things for companies, for lawyers, for regulators, and the space for lawyers is really shaping up in this industry. So I'm hoping like you sort of understand why ESG expertise is going to become increasingly valuable. And so, the question is not really whether ESG is just a sustainability function. It's really, okay, how am I positioning myself to really participate in this quickly evolving industry? Next slide, please. Okay, so I think this is we're coming close to the end, doing well with time here. So I wanted to also save some time to touch on some of my perspectives on building ESG expertise as a Nigerian lawyer. And before I get into that, I also wanted to reference a piece I read recently by the NBA Legal Education Committee, which was really calling for climate competent lawyering in line with global best practices and encouraging lawyers to fully integrate corporate due diligence on ESG and human rights when providing counsel. So I thought that was very interesting and of course timely, this NBA statement, which is kind of what trainings like this aim to do, hopefully, just bridging that knowledge gap where it exists. So the first perspective I have on how to do that is really trying to build your ESG foundation, beginning to develop a working knowledge on reporting frameworks, like the ones we've touched on: ISSB, IFRS, GRI, SASB, and TCFD. Also, leaning into subscribing to ESG newsletters and regulatory updates just to ensure you're staying ahead of the curve. So I've given some examples on some of the ones I frequently consult, like Responsible Investor, IFRS Foundation Updates, ESG Today, which really gives you a high-level overview on how the industry is moving and shaping up across different jurisdictions. There's also, secondly, working towards building technical credibility that could come through completing ESG courses, ESG certifications. And I found many of these certifications and courses to be also really practical. There's usually a space for answering like real life case studies. So just finding avenues to apply the knowledge you're gathering on the industry, I think would really help you just bridge the knowledge gap and also like position yourself in how you show up in contributing to the ESG issues that are going to be very prevalent and common. So the third is also building your professional brand. And this could look like publishing articles and insights on LinkedIn, could just be like short and sweet pieces or contributing to thought leadership. If you don't feel comfortable with doing that just yet, through engaging with already published content, through adding comments, asking clarifying questions, just showing that engagement. There's also participating in ESG events as well, and also professional discussions, which I find to be helpful, especially with my experience as well before getting into the industry. I found those events to really help me understand how to speak the language. As you probably can tell, the language is a bit different. There's like lots of technical frameworks. So just being able to get fluent in ESG is really, really crucial and helpful as well. And then fourthly, also leveraging your legal advantage. I can't even stress this enough. I think being lawyers already is just a a it's really an added value in this industry. I've seen it time and time again on how it just already shows and indicates that you have a natural sense for being able to analyze regulation, being able to synthesize it, being able to advise, which is what you already do so well. So just thinking of how your current legal skills can more easily help you to engage in this industry, because I think there's going to be much more opportunities for lawyers to contribute, like I mentioned in previous slides. And of course, also, it doesn't always have to be thinking of what new thing I need to do or what I need to start building now, but also thinking of your current role and trying to like take a step back to more frequently adopt an ESG lens. You probably find that you've already been doing that, hopefully from these training sessions, and just being able to have a different perspective on how you can more actively integrate ESG as you practice, or if you're in-house, or like whichever positions you're in. So I think these are some tried and tested ways that they've worked for me in just being able to engage with this really exciting and quickly evolving space. That being said, I think we've come to the end, if I'm all right. This is the last slide. I'm now going to be open to questions, but before I hand the mic to you, Ifeoma, I also wanted to say how, you know, just reflecting on this series, I remember like when we started, we really started with ESG, understanding what it is, understanding the reporting landscape, understanding the global landscape as well. And then we moved to really trying to understand what the role of lawyers are. I'm hoping that we leave here with a good understanding on like ESG is not creating any new area of law. It's rather like reshaping existing legal practice. And I hope, moving forward, you can see your role in this industry and also think about how you can, whether you're in private practice, in-house, how those issues that are going to come up are going to uh, uh, afford you opportunities to hopefully leverage on some of the insights you've gathered from this training, giving you some more practical understanding on what ESG actually is. And yeah, like the MBA educational committee said, just thinking of your current role and how you can adopt an ESG lens to it is what I hope you've taken away from these past sessions. But that being said, thank you, everyone. It's been really, really great. Honestly, so far, it's been an engaging set of participants. And thank you to the Legal Business Network as well for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you. Please let's show some love to Chioma. It's not been for speaking consistently for the past 1 hour. Please let's show some love, show her, heart emojis and all that. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Someone is asking whether there will be slides. I recorded this session, it's live on YouTube, so you can we'll share the YouTube link later, and you can also search for Legal Business Network on YouTube. You'll see the current session. So thank you, Choma, for that amazing insight on ESG. So we are very grateful, for this session, the entire series, starting from the first and the second, then this last session that we joined the two topics. So thank you very much. And before we go and have some questions, as we are teaching, you are also learning, then areas that we need more insight, we'll also ask. As lawyers, when we are not citing cases in courts or reviewing agreements and all that. So when you start talking about some technical terms, you may just, if you are not careful, you just lose us. I know you took time during the second session to really talk about the regulations and all that. So, but while we were speaking, I saw when you're talking about employment and labor rights, I saw an acronym DEI. So maybe if you could explain what that means. And somewhere else also, I'm not going to ask you to explain the ISSB because there's a session that it took time to talk about those regulations. So, but some of these terms for this particular session, then we could give us more insight on that. So that DI under employment and labor rights, where you're talking about how ESG is being embedded in various practice areas. You also talked about, I also saw somewhere where I saw CCUS, something like that. So maybe you could also let us know what those acronyms mean. Then you go into the search, the Q and the chat box. I know there are a number of questions there. Maybe I can just read them out. But
Okay.
just
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for flagging that. And yeah, the acronyms, there's so many. So DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are organizational principles that are aimed at ensuring fair treatment, representation, a sense of belonging for all individuals, particularly those that are marginalized. So diversity, I would say it's really taking up speed over here, but it's ensuring that there's space and equity across the board within organizations, like, gender equality, disability accommodation, really emphasizes the variety of perspective and experiences that individuals bring to a group, and is really trying to ensure that there's equality, equity, recognition, given to everyone individually, and really promoting equal opportunity across the board in workplaces. So that's what the
Okay,
EIS.
sorry. To just add in what you're explaining, is it what's pillar of the ESG does that come under?
Oh,
Is it
okay,
corporate
S.
governance or social? Is it
It's usually S, and it can also be G, right? It's usually S, and it can also be G. S because it's the social pillar. It has to do with people, communities, representation. And then G is when you think of board representation, that's when it usually comes up, like the lack of female representation in the board. Like in Canada, for instance, board of directors are just like white men. So, there's like a lot of push for representation for females and, women in the board. So it's usually S and G.
okay? Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So I don't know if
And
you want to touch on the
CCUS, yeah.
CC. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so CCUS stands for Carbon Capture and Utilization Storage. So it's an energy efficient project that is installed in companies' facilities to help capture carbon. So, we know how climate change is a thing because of all the carbon we've been emitting for decades. So CCUS is a project that helps capture carbon before it's released into the atmosphere. So the carbon can either be permanently stored underground, which means no emissions, which means like net zero, or it can be utilized for another operation in the company. So it's essentially an energy efficient project that mostly companies in energy intensive sectors are increasingly investing in. It's really expensive, but there's also like government incentives that are in place now to really help support companies and close the investment gap.
Okay, thank you for those clarifications. You see why it was necessary to to ask those questions so that we would understand, how that relates to us. So quickly would go into the. I see a number of comments and on in the chat box. I'm just going to the chat box to read out some of the questions. Yes. I know you're seeing some of them, but let me just quickly read out some of the questions there from my. Okay, so I have some very interesting questions that I asked as well. But let me start with others. There's a question that says, please, can you recommend ESG courses and certification lawyers can take, especially for beginners and institutions offering them?
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely recommend a few. So there's a couple from organizations like CSRD. So the CSRD Institute, which we've already touched on the CSRD. There's IFRS. So if you go to their websites, you find a ton of courses. There's also ESG Today is this newsletter for ESG that usually has recommended courses and trainings for folks trying to really increase their knowledge in the industry. There's FCA as well. So I'll be happy to like perhaps in a follow-up, send them to Ifoma so it's more comprehensive. But there's a ton of them actually. The problem is trying to find, not having analysis paralysis and trying to find like one that would actually deliver value. So I'm happy to follow up there.
Okay, so as soon as I get that from the facilitator, I will pass it on to participants who uh, participated in this session. So I have a number of comments here. It's a very enriching presentation. Thank you. Justina says, thank you so much, ma'am. Thanks to Legal Business Network to great session. So Choma, thank you once again. So let me, as I'm scrolling to see someone has still asked the question again, is if he's able to get the slides. Yes, we have the slide, but we have the recording as well. So instead of sharing the slides, we'll share the recording instead. So it's on YouTube. You can get that on YouTube, but I will also I will also circulate on lawyers WhatsApp groups. So if you are in any of the WhatsApp groups where we circulate content, then you might get them. But you can just search for Legal Business Network on YouTube. You'll see our channel there, and you'll see this session and also the first session. It was only the second session that I didn't stream live on YouTube. So yes, so let's go to some of the key questions I asked here. So we have discussed what ESG is and the evolving global regulatory landscape. So in practical terms, I know you've touched on some of this, and maybe if you could just throw more light. So how is ESG changing the role of lawyers, and what opportunities should Nigerian lawyers be positioning themselves for over the next 5 years? Mm. So I know a number of persons may have missed that part that you tried to specifically deal with that. So maybe if you can just give us a further insight on that, maybe for the benefit of those who didn't join early.
Okay. Yeah, happy to do that. So the first question was, how is ESG changing the role of lawyers? Yes, I would, reiterate that it's definitely changing existing areas of practice in the sense that it's being embedded into specific areas of law that we're already well versed in, like whether that's corporate finance, corporate and commercial. The reality is that, you know, particularly for the energy sector, the investment necessary to finance the energy transition is astronomical. And so lawyers are gonna play a major role, I feel, with renewable energy projects, whether that is solar projects or power purchase agreements, which is when, a PPA is when a company buys electricity from a power supplier for a large number of years. So it's really like over 10-year agreement. And because electricity also is really critical to the energy transition. So I feel like there's definitely things in the energy sector where I think it's gonna uh, not disrupt existing areas of law, but really complement them and present more opportunities for lawyers to advise on some of those transactions. I touched on, again, sustainable finance. That's going to play a major role because there needs to be just more projects being signed off, more investments being made to actualize some of Nigeria's climate-related commitments. So it's going to play a role in that sense through like more so through specific areas of law. And the opportunities Nigerian lawyers should position themselves for over the next 5 years. I would say just thinking of your current existing areas of practice and sort of leveraging on some of the knowledge and hoping you've built from your exposure to ESG and thinking of how and what ESG means to your existing area of law practice. And that way, my hope is that you'll be able to like draw things from what you're seeing now, to like position yourself for over the next 5 years. For instance, there's lots of opportunities arising from a few consulting firms. Like I know some folks back in Nigeria that have specific ESG consulting firms, and these are lawyers. So opportunities in that sense could also emerge from those avenues. There's going to be, I imagine, increasing climate litigation as well in the Nigerian legal space. So that's also another opportunity that I think is going to just increase exponentially. So those are some of the things, like specific
Okay.
things, I think.
So thank you. We'll just I want to manage our time for the next 10 minutes so that we can just round up. Um, so before you go into the next question that talks about talking about developing expertise, I know it's connected to one of the questions you've answered about the certifications and all that. But I wanted to, when you mentioned greenwashing, and talked about that it could lead to lawsuits. So I wanted to even know. So in this case, who sues, the government or the let's say typically in an oil producing community, for instance, is it the community that sues or irrespective of greenwashing, or the regulator, the government?
Mhm. That's a great question, actually. So the it really depends on the specific jurisdiction. Like I'll give an example because there's one in Canada, right? It's called Bill C-59. For that bill, for instance, it gives the government only the ability to bring a lawsuit. Actually, interestingly, the bill was watered down because initially it gave just like individuals the ability to sue. So I would say it's nuanced. Currently in Nigeria, I'm not aware of any like Competition Act laws that um, um, avail that opportunity, but based on best practices, based on what I'm seeing in other markets, it's usually the government or the regulator that can bring a claim. And then also in some instances, there's also the specific consumer. Like I think for consumers, for the consumer staples sector, that's something that's more likely to happen in giving consumers the ability to actually bring a lawsuit against like a food and bev company, for instance, for disclosing a statement that's not substantiated, that's not backed by any credibility. So each market is
Sorry, are
different.
you saying the affected consumer can bring, or the regulator like the Federal Consumer Competition, the FCCPC, under the FCCPC, or the affected? So maybe if you release a false statement and it affects me based on that statement I act, and it now affects me. So will I say I've suffered injury? I would sue you for that, maybe for negligence or for something, or then come under the regulator to report you that based on this is what you disclosed and you found out that it was false, and maybe prompting the regulator to sanction.
Yeah. So to answer that, I'm not aware of any such regulations like that in Nigeria to allow that. But what I'm saying is in other markets that has been tested and that did not sit well by the regulators. So in the Nigerian case, I think the regulators are likely going to be the ones only being able to bring a lawsuit. But generally, the best practice is that it's the regulator. And I think having the concern with having like the floodgates open for every term they can harry also has its own peculiarities. So in the Nigerian landscape, I imagine it's just the government. But like I said, I'm not aware of any such regulations at the moment that actually
Hopefully in the future.
provide that. Yeah, but hopefully in
So
the
let's,
future.
yes. So let's just dive in to say, to the other questions. So I'll just ask two questions together so that I just address them. I said Nigeria is still, okay, my second and third question. For lawyers who are interested in building a career in ESG but have little or no prior experience, what practical steps would you recommend they take to develop the necessary expertise and become competitive in this field? I know it says something about a competition, a certification, but maybe you can just clarify. So how would what steps? We are talking about practical steps now. Then,
Yeah.
just to add another question so that you quickly address both. Nigeria is still developing the ESG regulatory and policy framework. So, where do you see the greatest demand for ESG legal expertise emerging? And how can lawyers begin creating value for clients before ESG requirements become more entrenched? So, I wanted to dwell more on the third question, but maybe just chip in one or two things in the second.
Okay, so I should start with the third.
Uh, yes, start with just say something on the second, then dwell on the third.
Okay. Okay, practical steps. Practical steps. So when you have no ESG experience. So I would say, just thinking back to my own experience, at least, what I did was I started by reaching out to folks that were already in the industry, to be honest. That was my first step. So reaching out on LinkedIn, I did that. I met up with so many people just to really understand, because that's a good question, because I think ESG can sound very abstract. Like, what do you actually do? What's your day to day? What do you mean you're an ESG advisory specialist? Tell me what you do. So I think having conversations like that is an actionable next step for every lawyer to take, because you leave such conversations with really understanding what the day to day is like, what the problem this specific role is solving, how you can come in. Another practical step I would recommend is also thinking of the soft skills you already have currently that would help position you well into getting into the industry if that's something you want to do, like soft skills, which lawyers already have, like problem solving, being able to advise, being able to interpret complex regulations. And then from those conversations you're having with people already in the ESG industry, thinking of, okay, what skills do I need to bridge? So those are the two steps I would say that are practical that I took when I was in your position, whoever asked the question. And the other question is
And,
around,
and if I may ask, maybe also attending trainings like this or some other events where
yes,
ESG that is focused on ESG related matters as well.
exactly. Yeah. Also, yes, attend more of these trainings. I forgot. Um, and then the other question was, if there's one, sorry, what was
Yes, the
so
question is talking about that Nigeria is still developing its ESG regulatory and policy framework. So where
yeah.
do you see the greatest demand for lawyers for ESG legal expertise emerging? So how do we start, and how can lawyers begin creating value for clients before ESG requirements become more entrenched? So now it is still Nigeria is having is it 20 what again? You mentioned it the other time when it becomes
2028.
obligatory. So we are still in the process. So now
Yeah.
that we're in the process, so which areas are we looking at that? No, when this thing actually becomes entrenched in our laws and all that. So what would be the greatest demands, from the market for lawyers, for instance, legal expertise? So maybe that can now guide us on how to prepare ourselves and position properly before the time.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The greatest demand, I would say, is being able to understand what the various frameworks are, and also being able to interpret those frameworks through extrapolating what the actual recommendation is to a potential company. So like you mentioned, yeah, by 2028, there's FRCN has made that announcement. So what that means is that now companies would likely, your clients could likely be consulting legal advice on how they can meet those IFRS S1 and S2 requirements, which are essentially, frameworks under four main pillars, like companies being able to show that they are disclosing a strategy to meet their targets. Companies are setting their targets, whether that's climate related, emission reduction targets, that companies are integrating climate risk into their enterprise risk management, and also governance, that companies have like good and strong governance practices, because those are the four metrics really that are embedded into IFRS. So I think when you say it that way, you would come in through being able to understand these frameworks that are being embedded, in a phased way. And what that means for a client, what that means for their specific sector, what that means, like if it's an oil and gas company or a food and beverage company, what does that mean? It means that they would be required to measure their emissions, for instance. How can I and ensure that the companies are being able to ensure that their data collection processes are mature enough to measure their emissions, because before you can set a target, you have to measure. So I think looking at those frameworks is where you would come into play, because those frameworks underpin the reporting requirements, and then breaking them down into those four metrics I mentioned, which is where I'm sure most of your opportunities for like advisory, consulting would come into play. So that's where I see the demand for ESG legal expertise growing, being able to understand those frameworks and what it means from a business standpoint.
Okay, so I think our time is up, and I'm just trying to see which other questions that we haven't answered. Um, so I'm seeing a lot of positive feedback here. So, Choma, we are most grateful. I have one more last question for you before we go. Um, so, before I do the vote of thanks, I would ask the last question: is there, if there is one key takeaway you would like every lawyer attending this training to remember about ESG and the future of legal practice, what
Mm.
would it be?
Mm. That's a hard one. One sentence.
Well,
Um,
it may not be one sentence anyway, but just tell us one key takeaway you want us, for those of us who have attended this training. So if we
yeah,
say we have done the training for ESG for lawyers, what would be our key, you want us to remember? What about ESG? Maybe when we mention ESG and the future of legal practice, then what should it be?
yeah. I would say that ESG. So actually, what I would like everyone to take away is that ESG is not just about sustainability as a siloed function. but rather ESG is now embedded into law practice as we know it, number one. And number two, ESG risks are as important as financial risks, which is really what ESG is trying to do, because financial risks are held to a higher standard. And what regulators are trying to do is ensure that ESG risks are also held to the same level of rigor, which means that there needs to be guardrails, there needs to be um, controls, like data controls around disclosing your ESG information. And so ESG is as important as non-financial risk because it does add value to businesses. So those are the two sentences. The first being that ESG is not just about sustainability, but that it's being embedded into legal practice as we know it, and that ESG is as important as financial risks that companies account for. So those would be my two main takeaways for everyone on this call.
Okay, thank you very much, Shoma. Thank you very, very, very much. And before I will bring the session to a close, I will just read out some feedback from the chat, and also in thanking Shoma for making out time. The time difference in Nigeria and Canada, and also even taking out time from work to facilitate this series of training. So it's a huge one, and it's a huge sacrifice at no cost. So Choma, we are most grateful. We are most grateful. Those talking about slides, I had mentioned that the session is recorded, is on YouTube. We'll share the YouTube link, and you can also go to YouTube and type Legal Business Network. You would also see the link for the training. And I think the link for the training will do you more good than the slides are well explained in the training, because it's a bit technical, I would say. It's better you listen to the teaching itself than just reading the slides yourself. In any case, the teaching also contains the slides, so you can watch the session on YouTube. So Orofe says, great session. Thank you so much, Augustine. I think I've read that one. Um, Oh, it seems there's one question that I missed here. Do Nigerian investors consider gender equality as part of their ESG investment decision? So those ones are actually, some internal governance issues. So if I may say, since the the ESG legal framework is still being put together, sort of. They don't really have some mandatory obligations for now, but it's something that a lot of companies are beginning to adopt. Choma, I don't know if you want to add something to that, but I just saw that miss question now. Okay, I think.
I think you were right on, Fima.
Mm,
No, the answer is not right now.
mm,
I'm not aware of any such
mm.
right now.
So we hope that by the time, by 2028 or thereabouts, when the frameworks have now been entrenched and become more, if I would say, mandatory, then they will have be under obligations to do that. And someone is saying, please, can we get the facilitators LinkedIn? Please go and search
Um,
for Choma Joanne Ebo on LinkedIn. Choma, you can put your LinkedIn link, the link to your
yeah,
profile.
okay. I would.
So just share it
Should I do
on the
that on
chat.
the
Yeah.
chat?
Yes, just copy it and paste on the chat. So you can just click the link there and you connect with her on LinkedIn. So, but
Okay.
you can also share search for Joanne Ebo. So we also see really grateful for the insightful session, excellently delivered. Thank you. Someone is asking, how can I join the WhatsApp group to get all the materials and follow up on the courses to take? So please, uh, there's no WhatsApp group for this session. There's no WhatsApp group for
Maybe
this session. I'm
maybe you
only
should create
saying
a
that
WhatsApp group for the
maybe
session.
yes, there's no WhatsApp group for this session. So if I may just, answer that. But lawyers belong to different WhatsApp groups, different branches, different interest groups. So I try as much as possible to share, um, on the WhatsApp groups where lawyers are, which I'm also part of. So for the those asking for the slides of the training, you can get that on YouTube, even for the first session that we had. Though if you happen to be in any of the other WhatsApp group where I or any of my team members are, you may be also able to see the link
Matthew, shut up now.
when they are shared. Okay, so thank you so much. Say, I love the eloquence of a highly esteemed ESG speaker. So, Choma, thank you. Thank you for that very insightful presentation and series of presentation, if I may say. So Grace is saying, thank you so much, Ifoma Ben, for organizing this wonderful training. Thank you so much, Choma, for a wonderful presentation. So thank you, Grace, for that beautiful feedback. Choma has put her LinkedIn link on the chat, so you can just click there. So if you click the link there, it takes you directly to her LinkedIn page, so you can connect and follow. And then if you have other personal questions. I didn't say you should flood our timeline with I messages with questions, but anyway, if you are someone who is interested in ESG, learning more about ESG, it's good to connect with people who are already established themselves in that area. So thank you so much for being part of this training. From the first session till now, we had the first session, had the second session, and we had, due to some circumstances, we had to push the third session into this fourth session, and we touched on both third and fourth topics in this session. And it's been an amazing audience, an amazing feedback. And we, in a very special way, I thank Choma, who has been so amazing in all the all the presentations, and also has generously given us her time without any charge. It's not, if you live abroad, that they charge per hour, and having 2 hours consecutively and or more in a session for 3 consecutive times, you know what that would mean. And if we were to pay, that will also be huge. So thank you, Choma, for graciously facilitating this session at no charge, and for all our wonderful participants. So thank you also for being active. And the lessons we learned here will not really make the same the desired impact if we don't put into practice, or we don't try to practice what we are being taught, or to try to advance are learning from what we have learned today and apply it even from what we are currently doing. Like, you can say, how does I'm a litigation lawyer, how does ESG concern me, or whatever. But you've heard her talk about climate litigation. So it's a specialized litigation. And though you are a litigation lawyer, you may not be briefed to handle that litigation matter if you don't have the knowledge about ESG. So that's why it's good that we have knowledge about some of these emerging areas, so that before the market is crowded, we have already positioned ourselves, to deliver value to clients and solve their problems. That's the only way we can make money, in this practice. So thank you once again. So I remain your host, Ifoma Ben, founder Legal Business Network. and a founding partner at the Law Suite. So thank you for being part of this session. So this is where we draw the curtain to our ESG training for lawyers. And I believe those who attended the last session also got their ICLE certificate. I forgot to mention that earlier. So if you registered and you attended, so look out for your the certificate from the MBA Institute of Continuing Legal Education. They are monitoring this training. So we have representatives here from the MBA ICLE. So it's a training accredited by the Institute of Continuing Legal Education. So you also be issued the certificate for attending this training and the earlier one. So thank you once again and enjoy the rest of your evening. And once again, Chioma, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye for now.